Hi there. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made these 3 crater-themed terrain pieces for tabletop games of Warhammer 40k. So the idea for these 3 terrain pieces was pretty much just to finish off the list of terrain projects that I had for my 40k table. I had already made a whole bunch of buildings, a bunker, trees, all sorts of stuff. And I knew that I wanted one last series of terrain pieces to act as maybe objective markers or whatnot. I wasn't really sure. I just knew that some bomb craters on the battlefield would look pretty cool and be a fun way to round off making the terrain for a 40k table. So I feel like I have to put the same disclaimer that I put at the start of all of my videos. I'm not an authority on anything to do with crafting or painting or anything like that. That's not really kind of what this channel is about, especially given that I have just taken a massive break away from crafting, so I kind of felt very much like a beginner again, even though I can't really consider myself a beginner. I mean, I've made a bunch of different things. This channel is more about me just kind of sharing my progress as I learn the hobby myself. As such, please share with me any tips or suggestions that you might have. You are definitely going to see things in this video that were not done correctly, oh my god. So yeah, when you do see something that you think that could have been done better or a different technique could have been applied, please reach out, either leave a comment or drop me an email. Any help that you can give would be greatly appreciated. So I knew that I didn't just want plain craters, I wanted there to be signs of life, well, death I suppose. And I knew that I wanted some kind of signature detail for each build. So I figured that I would have one crater with a destroyed artillery piece, one crater flooded with water with corpses in it, and maybe, just maybe, one crater with a destroyed flaming tank in it. See if you can guess which one of those is infinitely more ambitious than the others. Yeah, not all of this went to plan, that is for sure. These ended up being a perfect example of how the idea that you have that seems simple turns out to just be a complete nightmare. And the idea that you have that seems really complicated is just also a complete nightmare as well. But yeah, we'll go through it. Okay, so the first piece, which I call the Canon Crater, I knew that for this piece I wanted to have a destroyed artillery piece. So yeah, I basically took a couple of reference photos of old kind of World War I era artillery pieces, and I just raided my bits box. Yeah, I just kind of grabbed a load of different things. I knew that this particular piece here, which is the atomizer thing from an e-cig, I knew that would kind of form sort of the core shape of an artillery piece, and it was the perfect scale. But yeah, I just started kind of putting stuff together. There's a couple of different things here. There's straws, just plastic piping, some cardboard I-beams that I had already made. This little piece that you see here, yeah, that is the bottom of an objective marker, something, yet again, stolen from my daughter's box of Necromunda. So eternally grateful to her for not knowing that I took it. Well, that's actually the bottom part of what became the radio in my Terrain Ruins video, so waste not, want not, I suppose. You can see my war-torn cutting mat there. You will see a brand new one later on, although it won't be in great shape by the end of the video. I seem to be running at the rate of 1 new cutting mat per video, so yeah, tidiness probably isn't one of my strengths when it comes to crafting. But I think that's okay, it doesn't matter. I also don't seem to be that bothered about cutting the tips of my fingers off either. Maybe be a bit more sensible with a knife than you will see me being. Oh, one thing I will say that was just the biggest headache ever was trying to create these wheels for the artillery piece. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this than how I did it. I was basically just doing my best to superglue straightened pieces of wire to the inside. It's like the seal of an e-cig liquid bottle with just a little piece of plastic to act as the axle of the wheel. And it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare trying to make that. But it was still a lot of fun to make, but it definitely, there had to have been an easier way to do it, and not the way that I was doing it. Yeah, I had so much fun making this artillery piece, my god. I really kind of approached this with just so much excitement and enthusiasm because I had such a clear idea in my head. I didn't have any nervousness or anxiety about not knowing how to do something or if it wouldn't turn out right. I just had this crystal clear idea in my head and how to go about achieving it, and it really did go according to plan. The downside of it though was it was supposed to be a destroyed artillery piece. And once I'd made it, I didn't want to break it or dismantle it in any way. So not wanting to damage it became a problem because on the finished piece, It looks okay, like it looks cool enough. I don't think it's painted particularly well, but like it looks alright. It serves the purpose, but it looks a little bit too intact. In particular, this part here, I think that should have been bent or twisted in some way to really show that it's, you know, it's a destroyed artillery piece and not just an artillery piece lying on its side. So making the crater base itself, I started off with foam from a playmat. And it turned out to be really difficult material to work with. As you can see here, it's just very difficult to carve detail into it. I think it was much better for larger projects. I did end up just deciding to go with layers of polystyrene sheeting instead, which I just glued together and then just began shaping the crater with a hobby blade. So this piece, as you can see here, this was originally going to have a destroyed wall next to it. It was going to be on like a little base itself. And in this piece of footage that you can see here, you can literally see me thinking about, is this a good idea? Maybe this is not a good idea. One of the problems, I guess it's a problem, maybe it isn't that big a deal, but one of the issues that I have whenever I'm kind of coming up with ideas for crafting is my ideas snowball and I kind of get this feature creep thing set in where I'm like, oh my god, it'd be so cool to have this and then this and this. A great example of that is this little piece here. It's supposed to be a butcher's table, and this was supposed to originally be for my last video, for the blood and gore video, because I just wanted like a butcher's table with blood and gore on it. But then I was like, well, what's this gonna sit on? Maybe it could be sitting on like a tiled floor that's glossy and has got blood on it as well. Oh, cool. Well, but what is that floor a part of? Is that a part of a building, or is it just going to sit on top of a little plinth thing, or what? And I ended up making this, which is just enormously complicated. Like, this is going to be by far the most complicated piece of anything that I've ever done. When it is finished, there's going to be electronics, all kinds of different things, all kinds of different storytelling, because it was such a basic idea of, oh, I want a table with gore on it, really snowballed into something that is going to work out being really cool, but is just infinitely more complicated than I had originally intended. So yeah, whenever you can see me in this piece of footage here, I'm literally thinking to myself, wait, stop, slow down, just, you're gonna do the same thing again, you're gonna build this huge, massive, complicated whatever. Don't, just calm down. Just make a crater. Just make a crater. It doesn't need to have walls or whatever. It just make something simple. So that is eventually what I did decide to do. I knew that one of the little details that I wanted to have as part of some of these craters was to include corpses in it. So I went and I found, I think I got these off of Etsy. I'm going to go dig them out properly and get a proper link to them in the description for anyone that wants to buy them. I knew that they would look really cool in something like this, so I bought like a pack of those. I also bought some 3D printed heads as well, because like I wanted to actually see the faces as well. And yeah, I just started to kind of dry fit things together and you know, see how it would look with the artillery piece actually sitting in place. I did unfortunately have a bit of a spray accident, which is kind of, I can't believe I did this. Literally in the last video that I released, there was a part of that video where I was talking about how you should never spray rattle cans onto foam because it will melt your stuff. And literally then, the very next thing that I tried to make, I did exactly that yet again. So yeah, don't do that. Cover it in PVA first, spray it from a distance so it doesn't melt your stuff. But anyway, I started adding gravel and texture. I made some filler for the gaps. The filler itself was just PVA mixed with all-purpose filler. As for painting the dead bodies, I didn't really want to go into a lot of detail in trying to paint them well, because it had been so long since I had painted a mini that I don't know, I just wasn't in the frame of mind to try and do it. So it was literally just a couple of base coats and just dry brushed. It works enough. I started adding other details then, so some barbed wire and little bits of wood. The barbed wire I've mentioned before in other videos. It is basically like a coiled piece of, it's either 0.5 or 1mm wire. It might be 1mm thick wire, I'm not too sure. Coil it round like a pen or something, and then take pieces of fishing line and tie them around, and then super glue them in place, and then cut them off with a pair of scissors. They come out great every single time. They're very fiddly to make, but they do come out really well, especially after you've painted them, you know, with the different rust effects and stuff. So I started making filler for the gaps, because you can see here the gaps in between this corpse and the ground, the little kind of area that I had cut out for it. And this was when I realized that it might have been better to maybe kind of paint everything in place at the same time. I had to put filler on top of a paint job, of a finished painted mini. I don't think I went about things in the right order then. I think it would have been easier just to put it in place, put the filler around it, and then paint everything. I think the sequence of doing things I definitely do differently next time. I did make these shell casings as well, and I'm really happy with these. I think they look really convincing. They're very simple. I think there was just like like a lollipop straw thing, like a lollipop handle, whatever, just cut into shape and with a little bit of filler in one end, and then just painted up with these paints that you can see here. Base coat of, no, it might have been Rune Lord Brass. It was either Rune Lord Brass or Retributor. I think it was Retributor armor. And then just little bits of like a purplish color, like a reddish purplish color. Like, so I used Gal Vorbak red and then painted black on the inside with little black kind of highlights and stuff. Really simple, straightforward to do, but look very effective. So once I had all that ready, I did the primer, which is just a Rust-Oleum grey primer. I've talked about this before. Fantastic primer, perfect for this kind of thing. Then I added the base coat. The base coat was just a dark grey. I think I just mixed up just like cheap poster paint stuff. I didn't even really use any expensive paints like, you know, Citadel color or anything. You don't really need to. You might need an extra couple of coats on it, but the paint itself is so cheap that it doesn't really matter. So then I did dry brushing on top of that, which was literally just one layer of Ulthuan grey. Then I started adding the details in, so like adding the bodies into the places that I had set out for them. Added the cannon itself, put a few washes on there, just really basic stuff. Like I think I used some probably Agrax Earthshade. I also added some water effect. That's pretty much just Vallejo water texture mixed with a bit of black ink, I believe. Then I added some corrosion to the wire, added the wire itself. The last kind of final touch then was just to add some bushes, and then that's it. It was done. Pretty straightforward. So the next piece I call the barrel crater. Okay, right. So the idea for this crater was, okay, look, I'm just going to be straight up with you from the start here. This was a complete and utter disaster. This was supposed to be the most easiest one out of the three, and it was the one that I was the most looking forward to doing. But through making numerous mistakes, using the wrong materials, this was a nightmare. The first attempt at this, there were 2 attempts to do this, and the first one was a complete and utter disaster. So yeah, when we get into it, I'm still not 100% sure how I would go about kind of fixing some of the mistakes that I originally made. So if you guys know what I'm doing wrong, please let me know. I wanted to have, like, very simple, a flooded crater with a corpse in it. That's it. And I also thought it'd be really cool to have like a barrel in there as well, right? Like, nothing complicated. There's no electronics. There's no custom made pieces or anything. It's simple, right? But yeah, I thought this would be the easiest build, but nope, it wasn't. And that's because I went about it in a half-assed way, but yeah, we'll get into it. So I started off making the base out of foam board, which is a different material than I used for the first base. So I had this body that I wanted to use, and also this barrel, which also came from my daughter's box. And oh no, wait a minute. No, I think that came from the Imperium magazine, which was also my daughter's. But yeah, wherever I got it from. I started to kind of just dry fit, potential places where this could go. And then this is when I made my first terrible design decision. I decided to make a base out of cardboard that whatever liquid I was going to use, whatever resin or whatever I was going to use, I could pour on top of, so that I didn't have to have it be really, really deep. It could just be sitting painted on top of this piece of cardboard. But obviously, like, I just, even looking at the footage of this now, I'm just thinking, what are you thinking there? Because obviously trying to get that cardboard to be sealed correctly into that, with that barrel into it, was never going to be possible. There were always going to be little gaps that the liquid would run into, which is exactly what happened. So I don't really know what I was thinking there, but yeah, I tried this idea and again, it just did not work. So I started off layering a texture mix on top, which was just, again, PVA mixed with filler and a bit of sand. So I base coated the barrel and then the corpse as well, and then set about painting those. So this is my first attempt at painting this barrel. It looks okay. I wasn't particularly thrilled with how this ended up looking. It looks a bit kind of plain, and it's just sort of like it's fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but like without meaning to kind of cut ahead or anything, when I realized that this piece had failed and I started again, I stripped all the paint off of both the corpse and the barrel using, I think, isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush, and I stripped all the paint away and I repainted it, and it did end up looking much better, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I started to put the barrel and the body into place. I started adding some rocks as well that I wanted to have sort of coming out above the top of the water. I started painting the crater then, same paint scheme from before, just a primer to begin with, and then a dark grey just to kind of match everything else, and then the same dry brushing as before, the Ulthuan grey. So started adding more details. I thought it would look kind of cool to have a piece of barbed wire sticking out of the water. So I went about making this dropper bottle because I knew that at that point I had made the decision to pretty much just use the only thing I had to hand, which was this Vallejo water texture, not realizing that this was just a huge mistake. This was not the right tool to use for this. I knew that I was going to be mixing paint in with the water texture, and if I were to just like pour it in like using a spoon or something, I didn't want to risk kind of dripping it everywhere and making a mess. So I created this little dropper bottle out of an e-cig liquid bottle, which actually worked really well. It really did. It made applying the liquid to the model a lot easier than it otherwise would have been. So after I glued parts in place, I started adding the liquid. And, right, okay, so the liquid itself, as I say, it's the Vallejo water texture mixed with just a couple of different things, just to kind of make it look like murky sort of water. And at first, I guess it didn't look too bad. When the liquid was still, like before it had dried, after I had applied it, I took some black and brown inks to kind of mix in, to kind of give it this swirled looking effect that you can see here. And it kind of looks okay-ish. But what happened was, when that dried overnight, all those colours just melded together and just made one kind of goopy orange brown kind of thing. And I got up the next morning and I looked at it and I realised that looks terrible. That is not what I wanted to make at all. What have I done? Like, honestly, what have I done here? That looks ridiculous. In part because this Vallejo water texture is only supposed to be applied very, very thinly to whatever material you're sitting it on. But because I had put it on so thickly, it hardly dried properly. It was always spongy, and when you looked at it, it looked like leather. It didn't look like liquid anymore. It looked like just like a piece of weird yellow leather, and I was just like, what have I done here? Yeah, I didn't really get much photography of that because I was just like, why would anybody want to see this mess? And I just kind of sat down and thought, okay, I'm going to start again because I'm not happy with this. Yeah, like, as I mentioned, I'm not 100% sure what material I should have used. I think it should have been, I don't know whether it should have been like a 2-part epoxy kind of thing or just an actual resin that I should have poured onto this. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with resins and stuff. I've never really worked with them before. So yeah, if any of you guys out there have ever tried to make anything like this with like standing water, I'm definitely going to be doing projects that are going to have deeper water and stuff, and I'm going to need to know what to use. So if you could reach out to me, I would honestly really appreciate it. So I took all of those kind of parts out, took all the liquid out, because I could just peel the whole thing away. And then I took the barrel out and I took the corpse out and I stripped those, as I mentioned, and was going to repaint them. And I could not be happier with how, in particular, the barrel turned out. The corpse just was the same thing again, pretty much just the base color with some dry brushing. But the barrel, I really, really put a lot of effort into. And I am so thrilled with how this turned out. This might be the best looking thing I've ever painted. It just looks completely convincing. I'm so happy with it. It's basically a base coat of AK corrosion texture mixed in with Dowler Rowney, what colour is that? Burnt umber? Something like that? Yeah, and then just that allowed to dry and then gone over with Dirty Down Rust. Again, look, I'm sure you guys have heard of Dirty Down Rust before. If you're not using this though, start using this stuff. If you want rust effects, my god, there is nothing better that I've ever seen out there. If you want heavy rust, this stuff is incredible. Like, as you can see, it just looks so realistic. Yeah, I mean, like, if you just kind of compare the two barrels, like, again, the first one looked okay, but it's nothing compared to the second one. So what I decided to do this time is, instead of having like this weird stupid cardboard platform thing to put liquid onto, I would just put everything into that actual, like the base of that crater itself. So I glued the corpse in place, I glued the wood and the barbed wire, glued the barrel in place, and then just came back in there with the water texture mixed with a little bit of just a very, very slight amount of black ink. And yeah, just to make it look like the barrel had leaked some oil. It's not the effect I was trying to go for. I really did want to have like a flooded crater with a corpse floating in it, but I guess I failed at it. Yeah, that didn't turn out well. What I was left with is fine. It looks okay, it's perfectly serviceable, it looks fun enough on a tabletop. It's not what I originally wanted, but you know what? Doesn't matter. It's okay, it still turned out alright. Okay, so for the last piece, which I call the tank crater. So the idea for this then was, yeah, super ambitious to have a tank and have electronics in there. I did look up quite a few reference photos, but yeah, it was basically just the idea of having a tank that was freshly destroyed sitting in a crater. Pretty straightforward in concept, but I knew it was going to be technically maybe a bit difficult to try and achieve. So, yeah, so this is the original tank that I purchased. Oh my god, like it kind of is funny looking over this footage again, because I don't know what I was thinking. The scale is just completely wrong. I used this little unfinished pox walker, which basically just I used to like scale against stuff to try and see how big something needs to be, and it just proved without doubt that this was the wrong scale. But yeah, it was a 1944 M4 Sherman tank with a bulldozer, made by Greenlight Collectibles, a limited edition apparently. I really hope it isn't, because this is all that's left of it. I did take the thing apart and I tried to figure out a way of, will I make some weird artillery platform out of it or something? And I was just like, no, look, do better. Find another tank. It's going to need to be a kit or something, but this is absolutely not going to do. So no, put it into your bits box and be done with it. So I did eventually go looking for a model kit instead, in 1/35th scale. I also wanted something that looked vaguely early World War II, late World War I, or maybe into war years, that kind of era. Something that looks very old, very derpy, because it kind of fits the aesthetic that I was going for. So yeah, when I saw this, I was like, yep, that'll do just fine. And I'll be honest, I kind of had a blast making it, because it was just reminded me of my childhood and stuff. But like, I was halfway through making it and I went and looked at a review online of it. Like, this guy had called it one of the worst model kits that he had ever made in his life. It was like, well, I don't really get that, but I guess I kind of did a little bit, because he talked about the quality of the sprues and stuff. And as you can see here, the molds were absolutely awful, just really terrible. But I still had a lot of fun making it, I honestly did, and I ended up with a derpy little tank at the end of it, so, you know, it's all good. One thing I did notice though was I was already kind of concerned about how I was going to paint this tank, and I thought to myself, there is absolutely no chance in hell that I am going to base coat this with a brush. No way. I do not have the patience for that. So I ended up taking the leap and I purchased my first ever airbrush. I got this, what is it called? The Neo by Iwata. I looked at the reviews online, apparently it was a fantastic one for starting up. I also bought this compressor here as well, and yeah, once I kind of felt like I had the hang of it, I was able to paint this tank in minutes, or at least base coat it. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile purchase. So I made the base out of styrofoam again, and then started placing the tank, kind of dry fitting it in just different positions and different places, just to try and see where I wanted the tank to go, where I want, you know, sort of the focal points of the model to be. And it was at that point then that I got to work doing one of the most fun things I've done in ages. I had so much fun doing this, which was adding damage to the tank. I wanted to have like metal that had been peeled back from an explosion. So I knew that the turret itself was going to be lying upside down on the ground, and there's going to be flames coming out from the center of the tank. So I thought at the time that it would make sense to have metal that was peeled back. But funnily enough, it was only after I had this finished, when I went looking at other reference photos again just for like painting tips, when I realized, wait a minute, there isn't a single photo of a tank that has peeled back sheet metal, because they're not made of sheet metal. They're made of really, really thick, like steel or whatever, so they don't peel back like that. But even still, you know, I'm pretty sure you guys know the effect I was trying to go for, and I'm happy enough with how it looks. It's not realistic, but I guess it doesn't need to be. I also removed the base of the tank as well, because I knew that that's where I was going to have the battery compartment. I also removed certain parts from the tank itself that I knew that I was going to use as like a debris field around the tank itself. I also added shell holes, which was so much fun. These were really, really simple to do. You can use a drill, but what I ended up finding was just using the tip of a protractor, just stabbing that into the plastic itself, created these really, really convincing shell holes. There were some other impact craters as well that you can see here that were created by taking a drill and drilling into the plastic just a little bit to create a bit of a dent into it, and then coming in afterwards with modeling putty and just kind of using like the bottom of a brush or whatever and sort of inserting a little bit in and twisting it around. I think I got this from Night Shift, which is one of the best modeling channels, and he is like, my god, he is a professional at this stuff. I wouldn't ever try to replicate what he's doing, because it's just on a completely different level. I will never ever be there. But I did get this fantastic tip of his, like he does have a video talking about shell impacts and stuff. So please go and check him out. He will give much more detail as to how to achieve this effect than I will in this video. I then started applying filler to some of the gaps on the base itself, just to start kind of making things look a little bit more natural. Then started adding texture, just different layers of sand, little rocks and pebbles, stuff like that. So then I primed the base and then painted it with the same color scheme as the first two craters. At this point, I started looking at the LED that I had purchased for this. So yeah, I started to experiment with how that was going to look. In particular, I started to try and figure out where exactly is the battery going to go. I realized that because I had cut the bottom of the tank off, any light that was inside the tank was going to bleed out through that giant hole in the bottom of the tank, and it was going to come out through the ground. So I knew at this point I was going to need to seal the battery inside the tank by taking the base of the tank that I had cut off and like reattaching it somehow. So yeah, I painted up the tank, and I didn't record any footage of me doing this because I don't consider myself at all an authority on crafting, but I definitely am not an authority on painting, that is for sure. The tank came out okay. It came out fine. It was basically just a base coat of a grey that I mixed using a couple of different Citadel paints, and then different layers then of like some washes, some rust effects for like the tank treads and the exhaust at the back, and then little bits of kind of accent color rust here and there. I didn't record any of the process of me doing that because it's almost irrelevant to this video. It's not really about how to paint stuff like that. It's about kind of how I made the crater itself. So apologies if I'm kind of skipping through that, but it just didn't feel right for me to make a video showing how badly I paint stuff, because I didn't think that would be interesting to anyone. So I started wiring up the LED for the tank turret first, and it went okay. Everything was wired into a 3-volt battery and one of these 3-volt battery housings and a little switch. And as you can see there, I was able to get the switch to fit a little hole that I had deliberately left in the back of the turret so that you can reach around and you can flick it on and it comes on and it works. So I knew I wanted to have a smoke effect, and I had seen tutorials of people using like cotton wool and stuff before, and on the night when it came for me to attempt to do this, I realized I didn't have any cotton wool in the house. So plan B, I went to my daughter and I said, look, do you have any teddy bears you don't need? And she was like, yeah, I have tons of them, just here, have this one. So this poor little doggy here, this little pug, who is now dead, I cut most of his head off to get in at the stuffing inside, so RIP to him, I suppose. This stuff worked okay. At first I was like, this is perfect, this is great, amazing, fantastic. I ended up just spraying it with the airbrush just the black. I didn't need any other sort of tones of color or anything, because all of the effect of this, the fire and everything, was going to be coming from an actual light source, so from a flickering LED. So literally all it needed to be was just sprayed with black around the outside, just to give it a bit of a two-tone effect with the original white color and then the black on the outside to make it look like convincing smoke. And it looks great, it looks fine. The downside though, I realized how thick the fibers are of this stuffing that I used. It's very thick, it's quite coarse. And I realized that it probably would have been better if I had used cotton wool, because obviously the fibers of that are much, much thinner, and I think it would have just looked a bit more convincing. So I spent ages trying to figure out, okay, where is this battery going to sit inside this tank that there's still going to be enough clearance on the ground for me to be able to sit the tank on the model. And obviously then, because I knew there would be light bleeding out from under this hole at the bottom of the tank, that I was going to need to seal this battery in place along with all the wiring and along with the light itself. Now, the switch itself to turn on the light, I had wired down into the very bottom of the foam itself, so you can see it here. You just basically lift the piece up and there's a switch there to turn it on. But everything else was going to be sealed inside this tank. So that's what I did. So painted the cotton wool up then or not the cotton wool, like padding or whatever. Painted that up then in the same way I did the first one, just using the airbrush. Yes, we started to paint up some of the details that I was going to have there. So again, more barbed wire, along with the wood for it as well. And then I started painting the bodies, and again, I didn't go into detail about how I painted these. They look fine, they look okay, they serve the purpose. They're not the focal point of this model, so, you know, I guess they don't need to look perfect or anything. So then I had this kind of moment that I'd been building up towards, which was gluing the tank in place. It was just a bit of super glue activator, and yeah, job done. It was glued in place and it all worked and functioned the way that I wanted it to. So I did decide at this point then that there just wasn't enough detail in this area here. So I took a lot of the painted shavings and stuff and bits of plastic from the model kit and mixed it in with a lot of gravel and put it into a new PVA mix just on this side of the tank here. I also added, again, some water texture effects just mixed in with a bit of black just to make it look like there might be oil leaking from the tank or something. I then started adding the different parts that had been pre-painted to make it look like a debris field. This actually was probably the trickiest part of this, because it kind of felt like no matter how I did this, it always looked like these pieces had been placed there rather than naturally just kind of sitting there as the result of an explosion. I just couldn't get it to just look natural. And even on the finished model, it's still not quite there, but you know, I guess it sells enough the effect. It just doesn't really naturally look all that much like a debris field, but you know. I then added the turret, super glued that in place. I decided to add a little bit of detail there, just some blood on this guy's face and then his dismembered arm. And then also on this dude here, just to kind of make it look a little bit like he might have been dragging himself, like had survived for a moment or two before he bled to death or something. Just a little bit of tiny visual storytelling for anyone that looks that closely at the model. Yeah, so that was that piece pretty much finished. What I ended up with, I was really happy with. The entire kind of point of this model was to sell the effect of a burning tank, and these two flickering LEDs with the smoke absolutely sell that. When it's just kind of sitting there and it's not turned on, it looks a bit weird, to be honest. It doesn't look completely natural, but as soon as you turn those on, it's like, wow, that looks cool. And it really pops on the tabletop as well. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with how that turned out. Okay, so that pretty much finishes everything for those three builds. I would mention that I have, as some of you guys can probably see, taken a very long break away from crafting for some personal reasons, and it was very, very, very difficult to get back into. When I started crafting again, I had forgotten absolutely everything. I couldn't even remember how to do like texture mixes and stuff. I was watching my own videos again just to try and remind myself of how I did stuff. But I was really, really, really determined to do this, to continue on with this channel and to continue on with crafting, because I've had projects in the past that I was really passionate about that I've taken breaks from and found it impossible to get back into. And I desperately, desperately do not want that to happen with this, because I'm too passionate about it. I really, really feel like I really enjoy myself doing this, and I don't want to stop. I've got a lot of projects that I have planned, some really ambitious stuff as well. I'm just so glad that I did finally take the leap to go in and get this project finished. And I can sort of breathe out a little bit and kind of just relax and get back into enjoying the hobby again. On that topic of future projects, I'm not going to reveal what my next project is going to be because I want it to be a surprise, just in case it doesn't come together. Like, it's not related to tabletop. All I will say is this: if you are a fan of Mad Max, this could... you might like this. You might want to stick around, because if this comes together, this is going to be so cool. But yeah, as soon as I get this video uploaded, I am going to jump in and see if I can make it happen. But yeah, if you like what I'm doing here and you haven't subscribed, please do all the algorithm stuff. Subscribe, like, share, all that stuff, because yeah, it might just help get a bit more attention to the channel and help things grow, and that can only be a good thing. Yeah, so if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much, and I will see you again in the next one. Alright, take care, bye.